I never thought my life would unravel over an old photograph. I was 33, a software consultant living in a quiet cul-de-sac in Portland. Business was good. I just landed a major contract with a logistics company, which meant long hours, high pay, and the satisfaction of finally proving to my old man that I could build something without breaking my back in a warehouse like he had. My dad, Henry, was a retired dock worker. Rough hands, harsher opinions. You know the type. We never quite saw eye to eye, but we learned to coexist, especially since my mom passed 5 years ago. Without her, we had no real glue, just the occasional Sunday dinner out of guilt. I wasn't flashy. My condo was modest, my car functional. But I had one thing I truly valued, Mara. 31. A school psychologist with a wicked sense of humor and eyes that pulled you into her orbit. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming 2 years back. She was pouring wine, barefoot on the balcony, talking to a stranger's toddler like they were equals. I was hooked before she even looked at me. We clicked. Not in the sparks flying, rom-com way. No, it was slow, steady, real. We learned each other's habits, carved routines out of chaos, built something stable. After 18 months, we moved in together. 8 more, and I proposed in the most unremarkably perfect way possible on a Tuesday night, over takeout and a rerun of Parks and Rec. She said yes with tears in her eyes and a smile that made me forget how awful the world could be. The wedding was scheduled for October. Just 6 weeks away. Mara was knee-deep in planning, comparing florists and table linens, while I handled logistics. My dad, surprisingly, offered to help with venue negotiations. He'd spent his life haggling with vendors and claimed he could spot a markup from a mile away. I figured it was his way of trying to be involved. I let him. God knows he hadn't been around much when I needed him younger. Then came the night I found the photo. It was a Thursday. Mara was out with her best friend, some spa night they'd been talking about all week. I was sorting files on our shared laptop, organizing vendor contracts, invoices, things like that, when I clicked the wrong folder. It was labeled Scraps. Harmless enough. Inside were random images, Pinterest screenshots, dress inspirations, candid photos of us at various parties. But one photo didn't belong. It was taken in a dimly lit room I didn't recognize. Mara, clearly mid-laugh, her hair damp like she'd just come out of the shower. And Henry, my father, shirtless, sitting next to her on a hotel bed, holding a wine glass. At first, I didn't believe it. My brain tried to rationalize. Maybe it was photoshopped. Maybe it was old. Maybe there was an explanation I couldn't see. But the timestamp was there in the metadata. 2 weeks ago. The night she said she was visiting her cousin in Seattle for a bachelorette planning meeting. I stared at the screen for a full minute, numb. My chest felt like it was caving in. That dry, static buzz filled my ears. Then I closed the laptop and stood up, slowly, as if any sudden move would shatter the world further. I didn't call her. I didn't call him. Instead, I went for a walk around the block. Then another. At some point, I found myself parked outside of my friend Tyler's place, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I stayed there until the sun started to rise. The next morning, Mara came home as if nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek, poured herself coffee, chatted about the spa treatments. I watched her carefully, trying to detect the lie in her eyes. But she was a master. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it. Later that day, I called my dad. Need to talk, I said. Come by tonight. He grunted, told me he'd be over by 6. I spent the day in a fog, running through every conversation we'd had in the last month. Every weird look. Every moment that now felt like a clue. The time Mara said my dad was surprisingly charming, or when she laughed too hard at one of his off-color jokes during dinner. At 6:04 p.m., my father knocked on the door. I let him in. He looked casual, almost smug in that I'm just visiting kind of way. I offered him a beer, then led him to the living room. He sat on the couch. I remained standing. I found something, I said. On Mara's laptop. His brow furrowed. What kind of something? I didn't speak. Just turned the screen toward him, the photo already loaded. His reaction was telling. Not shock. Not even denial. Just a long exhale, like a balloon deflating slowly. He looked down at his hands. Was gonna tell you, he muttered. That broke me. Tell me. I snapped, stepping forward. You slept with my fiancée. My fiancée, Dad? How the hell do you say that to someone's face? He looked up then, his eyes bloodshot but not with tears. With guilt. Or shame. I couldn't tell. It was a mistake, he said quietly. We were drunk. It just happened. I laughed then. Loud and bitter. No, it didn't just happen. It took planning. Texts. A meeting spot. Secrecy. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said, the same line every guilty man uses when they've already done irreparable damage. I didn't scream. I didn't hit him. I just turned to the door and opened it. Get out. He stood slowly, looked like he wanted to say more. But something in my face must have stopped him. He walked out without another word. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. Then I called Mara. You need to come home. Now. The silence on the other end was short, tight. Everything okay? No, I said. Everything is the opposite of okay. She showed up 30 minutes later, wearing the same tired mask of concern I'd seen her wear for clients. I didn't give her a chance to fake it. I showed her the photo. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Let me explain, she said. I didn't let her. I want the ring back, I said calmly. And your things out of this place by tomorrow. Are you serious? Her voice trembled, caught between indignation and disbelief. Dead serious. She broke, pleading, crying, grasping for reasons. It was one time, she claimed. He made me feel wanted. You've been so distant, always working. I didn't even bother to respond. The words bounced off me like rain on a windshield. Just go, I said. And when she left, I felt something strange. Not grief, not anger, just emptiness. But that was about to change. Because I had something neither of them expected. A plan. The morning after I kicked Mara out, I sat in my car outside the city courthouse, gripping a black notebook full of scribbles, timelines, and names. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. My stomach was acid and steel. But I was focused in a way I hadn't been in years. Most people in this situation want closure. They seek therapy. Some disappear, move states, start over. I didn't want closure. I wanted consequences. And not just for Mara and Henry, but for the entire lie they'd built around me. For years, I tried to be the bigger person. To ignore my dad's smug condescension, his jokes at my expense, his tough love, critiques disguised as concern. And Mara? She wasn't just someone I loved. She was someone I trusted with every part of my future. They didn't just hurt me. They made me question every choice, every instinct. That couldn't go unpunished. So I started with leverage. The photograph on its own was damning, but I needed more. I called Tyler, my best friend and the closest thing I had to a brother. We'd known each other since college. He was loyal to the core and had worked in cybersecurity before pivoting into private consulting. I told him everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. I need texts, emails, call logs, anything between them, I said. I need proof. Not just for me. Tyler didn't ask why. He just said, send me the devices. Mara had left her tablet in the apartment. She probably thought I wouldn't notice. I did. It still had her cloud accounts logged in. Within a few hours, Tyler had extracted everything, messages, audio notes, saved locations, even deleted photos from the last 6 months. It was worse than I imagined. There were conversations about me, mocking, belittling. My habits, my routines, even my voice. Mara had once joked in a text that my emotionally stunted ass was the price of dating someone with a working-class sob story. Henry responded with a laughing emoji and said, kid's always been a little soft. Needs a real wake-up call. The wake-up call, apparently, was them. In one thread, they'd even discussed continuing after the wedding. Henry wrote, once he settles down, he'll be too busy to notice anything. Mara replied, let's not push our luck. He's not that dumb. I compiled everything, printed it, annotated it, organized it chronologically. Then I made 3 copies, one for my records, one for Tyler, and one I wasn't sure what I'd do with yet. That weekend, I did something uncharacteristic. I visited my half-sister. Talia and I hadn't spoken much since Mom died. She was 5 years younger, from Dad's first marriage, and grew up in California. I always assumed she'd distanced herself because she wanted a different life. But now, I wondered if maybe she just saw Dad for who he really was long before I did. She lived in a modest townhouse in Eugene, with a baby on her hip and a worn look in her eyes that said life had not been kind lately. When she opened the door, she blinked at me like I was a ghost. Jason. I nodded. Hey, Tal. I need to talk. She let me in without a word. We sat at her kitchen table, and I told her everything. By the end, she was holding the folder of text with both hands, jaw tight. I always knew he was messed up, she said. But this. You weren't surprised? I asked. Surprised? No. Disgusted? Yeah. He left my mom for yours, you know. Swore it was different. Said he'd found real love. but he never loved anyone more than himself. I let the words sit for a second, then asked the question that had been burning. Why didn't you ever tell me that? She looked away, then back. Because I didn't think you'd believe me. You were always trying to prove something to him. I didn't want to be the bitter half-sister throwing mud. She wasn't bitter. She was right. I left Eugene with a deeper understanding of the man I'd spent years trying to please. And a much bigger plan. Because here was the twist no one saw coming, not even me. Henry had a side hustle. It wasn't listed on his taxes. It wasn't something he bragged about at family dinners. But thanks to Tyler's deep dig, I learned my father had been moonlighting for the past year as an independent consultant for a small logistics firm on the outskirts of Portland. Except there was no real consulting. Just back-channel deals, paperwork manipulation, falsified invoices, and kickbacks disguised as travel reimbursements. And here's the kicker. Mara had signed off on several of the payments. Her brother owned the business. They'd use me, my reputation, my name, my contacts. Because earlier that year, I'd introduced Henry to someone at a development conference who later partnered with Mara's brother's firm for warehousing software, on my recommendation. I hadn't just been betrayed romantically. I'd been used professionally, financially, legally. Now, I had options. I could go to the authorities, ruin them both. Or I could twist the knife in a different way. So I set the stage. I called Mara and said I wanted to talk. That I'd been thinking. That maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth salvaging. She arrived at a coffee shop downtown dressed like she'd won a war. Lipstick, confidence, that same mask of control. We sat down. I handed her a manila envelope. What's this? She asked. Your insurance policy. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the texts, the emails, the falsified invoice with her digital signature. Her face drained. You're bluffing. I'm not. She stared at me for a long time. What do you want? I want you to disappear, I said calmly. No interviews. No social media. You tell your family I ended things because I couldn't handle commitment. You take the story and swallow it whole. And if I don't? I leaned in. Then I send this to your brother's clients. The IRS. And let's not forget your professional license. Pretty sure forging financial documents is frowned upon. She said nothing. Just nodded slowly. What about him? She whispered. My father. I smiled. Don't worry. I have something special planned. And I did. Because the real punishment wasn't jail. It was exposure. The following week, I spent my evenings at a small bar near the waterfront. It was the kind of place that only locals knew, where the clink of ice against glass was the loudest sound, and the worn wooden tables were covered in years of spilled whiskey and stories. I wasn't drinking much, just staring at the wall, my thoughts circling in endless loops. The plan I'd set in motion was taking shape, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. I needed Mara to see exactly what she'd done, to feel the weight of every lie she told. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed my last card. The gala. The annual gala at the Portland Country Club was an event no one could miss. It wasn't just for the elites. It was where power was consolidated and whispered secrets passed around like the most expensive champagne. It was a spectacle and opportunity for people to network, to pretend that they hadn't spent the last year on their knees to stay afloat. I had a plan for the gala, a plan that would expose everything. It was time for the world to know what kind of person Mara really was. And more importantly, what kind of man my father had turned into. I knew that Henry would be there. He hadn't missed one in years. The only question was, who would he be with? Would it be the woman he betrayed his son for, or someone new to parade around to distract from the carnage? Tyler came through again. He had some connections of his own at the country club and helped me secure an invitation under my name, though I'd make sure no one knew it was me behind the curtain. The gala was on, and I wasn't going to be just another disappointed guest. On the day of the event, I dressed carefully. A dark suit that wasn't too flashy but expensive enough to turn heads. My hair was trimmed and neatly styled. I didn't look like the guy who had just lost everything. I looked like someone who had everything he needed and knew how to take back what was rightfully his. Mara had no idea what was coming. When I arrived at the venue, I scanned the crowd from the entrance. It was exactly what I expected. People laughing, posing for pictures, pretending everything was fine. I watched as my father stood in the corner of the ballroom, talking to a group of his old colleagues. Mara was by his side, looking like the perfect little trophy girlfriend, as if she hadn't just torn apart my life a month ago. I felt a sick twist in my stomach. But I also felt something else, a deep sense of control. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I walked in, making sure to take the longest possible route to the bar, so I could survey everything from a distance. There, amidst the chatter and the clinking of glasses, I saw what I needed, the right people in the right positions. The people who could make the most impact. Then, I waited. My moment would come. At exactly 9:15, the lights dimmed slightly, and a voice came over the speakers, announcing a special presentation. I could already hear the murmurs, the whispers of the crowd as they assumed it was just some standard speech or charity presentation. But when the screen at the front of the room flickered to life, I knew I had their attention. The first image that flashed onto the screen was innocent enough, a photo of the country club gala from a year ago, with Henry in the background, holding a glass of wine, laughing with some acquaintances. The crowd chuckled. But then, the next photo appeared. It was from a few months ago, the exact date I had pulled the text from. Henry and Mara, clearly caught in a private moment at a hotel, locked in a kiss. The crowd gasped. It was the beginning. Every image that followed was worse than the last. Text between them, their plans to meet under the guise of business trips, the same smirks they'd worn when they thought no one was watching. I hadn't spared them. I hadn't spared anyone. The captions were direct, unyielding in their detail. Mara promised me she was working on a campaign. Turns out she was working on my father. April 5th. The night before my birthday. Guess who was keeping secrets in the back of a rented SUV? The whispers grew louder, and I saw Henry's face drain of color. Mara's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, but there was no hiding now. Not from what they'd done. Not from the truth. I stood there, watching their humiliation unfold. The crowd was no longer clinking glasses. It was silent, all eyes on the screen. I felt a pang of satisfaction, but it wasn't as sweet as I expected. I wasn't relishing their downfall. I was merely making sure that the story would always be told right. Henry finally moved, stepping toward the screen, his voice rising in protest. What is this? This isn't. But he was cut off by someone from the crowd, an older woman from one of his business dealings, who said in a loud voice, "Is that Mara?" I didn't think she'd do that. She seemed so professional. Mara froze. Her mask cracked. And in that moment, she was no longer a manipulative fiancée or a deceitful lover. She was just a woman, exposed, vulnerable, stripped of all the power she thought she had. I didn't let them off easy. Not for a second. The final slide came up, a simple quote, one I'd used to remind myself why I was doing this. Character is what you do when no one is watching. The room was still for a long time. And then, the murmurs began again. This time, they weren't in whispers. They were loud, judgmental. The truth hung in the air like smoke. Henry's face twisted with rage. You don't know what you're doing, boy. You've ruined everything. No, I replied, stepping forward to meet him. You ruined everything the moment you thought you could take from me without consequences. A security guard approached, sensing the tension, but I didn't move. I stood my ground as the crowd began to scatter, and I heard the unmistakable sound of cameras clicking. Mara grabbed Henry's arm, whispering something in his ear. He pulled away, shaking his head. They turned and left quickly, escorted out by security. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I walked toward the back of the room, where my mother had been standing quietly, watching everything unfold from behind the curtain. She was calm, her expression unreadable. I didn't think you had it in you, she said softly, a smile breaking through the lines on her face. I didn't think I did either, I admitted. But I'm done being their victim. We stood there for a while, watching the remnants of their fall from grace. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about standing up to it. It was about reclaiming the life they tried to steal from me. That night, as the gala ended, I walked out of the country club without looking back. I had won. But the consequences for Mara and Henry? They were only just beginning. The weeks following the gala were a blur of strange satisfaction and new realizations. It's funny how the human mind works when confronted with betrayal at first. There's shock, disbelief, and a desperate need to understand why. Then, if you're lucky, there's a period of clarity. I was lucky. The fog started to lift. In the aftermath of the gala, Mara and Henry disappeared from the social scene. It wasn't just the scandal, it was the fallout. Mara's business connections evaporated. I wasn't sure if it was because of the humiliation or the legal risks I'd exposed. She was no longer a sought-after marketing manager. She was the woman who had slept with her fiancé's father, a stain that couldn't be washed off with a public apology or a sponsored Instagram post. Henry, too, found himself in a hole deeper than the one he'd been digging for himself all these years. His little consulting gig had been exposed for what it was: fraud. A quick audit revealed a trail of kickbacks, misdirected payments, and outright theft. The insurance firm he'd worked for fired him almost immediately. His name was on the lips of every colleague, but not in the way he'd hoped. He'd been reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. A warning about greed, ego, and family betrayal. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough for what they'd done to me. Mara tried once to reach out. It was a simple text at first, a cold, impersonal message sent a few weeks after the gala. I never wanted to hurt you. That was it. I laughed when I saw it. How could anyone be so deluded? Did she think I would crumble at her attempt to make things right after everything she'd done? It wasn't a message of remorse. It was just a last-ditch attempt to save her reputation. She needed me to forgive her, not for my sake, but for her own. I didn't reply. The next morning, I got a voicemail from her. She was crying, which only made it worse. She told me she didn't know how things had gotten so out of hand, how it had spiraled into something bigger than she had ever intended. But the words felt rehearsed, like a monologue she'd practiced in front of a mirror. I deleted the voicemail without a second thought. Henry tried next. He showed up at my apartment one cold Saturday morning, like a shadow from a past I was trying to bury. I wasn't surprised to see him. In fact, I'd been expecting it. He tried to reach out a few times after the gala, but I'd ignored his calls, blocked his number. He didn't deserve to be heard. But now, here he was, standing on my doorstep, his face pale, unshaven. His eyes were bloodshot, a combination of sleepless nights and self-inflicted misery. "You're right, Jake," he said, his voice low, defeated. "I can't undo what I did. I don't even know why I did it." I was weak. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him with cold indifference. There was no anger left in me, just numbness. He wasn't a father anymore. He was just a man who had made unforgivable choices. "I'm not here to make excuses," he continued, "but I'm begging you, let me fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I stared at him for a long time, taking in his desperate words. Fix it? There was no fixing this. There were no apologies that could undo the damage he'd caused. He had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. "I don't need you to fix anything," I said finally, my voice steady. "What I need is for you to leave me the hell alone." His face crumpled as if he'd been slapped. "Jake, I'm not going to listen to your sob story, old man," I cut him off. "You've had your chance. You lost it." The air between us felt thick with the weight of what had been said, what had been done. He stood there for a moment, waiting for me to soften, for me to invite him in and let him explain himself further. But I didn't. I closed the door in his face. I was done with him. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly began to rebuild itself around the wreckage they'd left. My business was thriving, more successful than it had ever been. I hired more staff, expanded the office, and started taking on larger projects that I had once believed were out of my reach. The house I had bought with Mara now sat on the market, gathering dust. I couldn't bring myself to go back there, to walk through rooms where I had imagined a future with someone who had never been who I thought she was. I didn't have the energy for bitterness anymore, or hatred. What I had was focus. My energy went into making my life the success I'd always dreamed of, not for anyone else's validation, but for my own. And then, out of nowhere, my phone rang one afternoon. It was my mother. "Jake," she said, her voice shaky. "I need you to come over. It's about your father." My chest tightened. "What happened?" "I don't know," she replied. He's asking to see you." I didn't even hesitate. I drove straight to her place, a cold feeling gnawing at my gut. When I walked in, I was met by the sight of my father, emaciated, older than I'd ever seen him, sitting in a chair by the window. He was a shell of the man I once feared. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, not looking at me. "I never took responsibility for what I did. I hurt you, Jake. And I hurt your mom. And I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know how to respond. Sorry didn't fix anything. Sorry didn't erase the fact that he had chosen his own selfishness over his son's future. I don't care about your apologies," I finally said, my voice tight. "It's too late for that." But he wasn't done. "I know," he whispered, "but I've lost everything. And it's my fault. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know that I'm trying to change. I'm going to therapy. I'm trying to rebuild. Not for you. Not for anyone else. For me." I took a deep breath. The anger that had once been my constant companion was no longer there. What I felt now wasn't rage. It was something colder. Something final. "I hope you figure it out," I said. "But that's your journey, not mine." I left without saying another word. It was time to move on. I had spent so much time focused on their betrayal, their lies, that I never stopped to consider how much I had changed in the process. I had been defined by them for so long, by my need to prove myself to a father who would never see me for who I was, by a fiancé who only saw me as a stepping stone. I didn't realize it at the time, but their actions had done something unexpected. They had stripped me of my attachment to them, forcing me to rebuild myself from the ground up. I didn't need to be their version of me anymore. I was creating my own life now, and it was better than anything I could have imagined. The days after my final confrontation with my father were a blur of work, reflection, and slow, painful healing. I had been so focused on revenge, on exposing them, that I had forgotten what it felt like to just live without that weight hanging over me. But now, with that weight gone, I could breathe. I could focus on what I wanted out of life, not what they had tried to dictate to me. The cabin by the lake was finally mine. No more memories of what I thought was going to be my future. It was just me and the quiet, the kind of peace I hadn't known in years. I spent my weekends hiking, fishing, and building a life that was entirely mine, something I could stand proud of without any reminders of the past. There were nights I'd sit on the deck, watching the sun set over the water, and I'd think about the man I had become, about how far I had come. And sometimes, I'd think about what my father had said that day in my mother's house, his weak apology, his attempt to find redemption. But I had no room for that kind of self-pity anymore. I was done carrying his baggage. It was his problem now. And then came the surprise I didn't expect. It was late October, a couple of months after I had walked away from the wreckage. I was having dinner with Mark, my oldest friend, and we were discussing a new project I had lined up when my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it gave me pause. I swiped to answer. Jake. I froze. Mara. Her voice sounded different, smaller, less confident. I'd almost forgotten what she sounded like. She didn't speak for a moment, and I could hear her breathing heavily. I need your help. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that startled Mark. You're calling me? After everything you did? You think I'm going to help you? I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. I don't know who else to ask, she continued, her voice trembling. I lost my job. I can't make rent. I didn't let her finish. Mara, you're on your own. You made your choices. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I'm sorry. For everything. It felt strange to hear her say that. The apology was hollow, devoid of any true understanding of the destruction she had caused. But something in her tone made me pause, just for a second. She wasn't the same woman who had left me reeling. She was broken now. And for the first time, I almost felt pity. But it passed quickly. I'm not the person you should be apologizing to, I said coldly. I hope you get everything you deserve, Mara. But I'm done. I'm done with you. With all of it. I hung up before she could respond. Mark gave me a questioning look, but didn't say anything. I just took a deep breath and set my phone back on the table. I didn't think she'd ever reach out again, I muttered. Mark didn't say anything at first, just watched me carefully. Finally, he spoke. You've changed, man. I had to, I replied. We all do, eventually. The only question is whether we learn from it or not. The next few weeks passed without incident. I threw myself into work, focused on expanding the business and taking on larger projects. The freedom of not having to deal with the constant anxiety of the past was a gift I couldn't take for granted. But I knew I couldn't escape the past entirely. It had shaped me, and the scars would always be there, but it wasn't controlling me anymore. Then, one morning, I received another call. It was from my lawyer. You're not going to believe this, he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and disbelief. What is it? I asked, already preparing for more bad news. It's your father. He's suing you. I almost dropped the phone. What? He's suing you for defamation. He claims the video you released at the gala ruined his career. He's seeking damages, and he's got some serious backers now. This isn't just a petty revenge case, Jake. He's serious. I sat back in my chair, feeling the world tilt for a moment. My father was coming after me, after everything I had done to rebuild. And for what? Because I had exposed him? Because I had shown the world who he really was? I couldn't believe it. This man, this miserable, pathetic man, had the audacity to take me to court. But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I don't care, I said, my voice steady. Let him try. Let him waste his time and money. He's already lost everything. What's left to take? My lawyer hesitated. Jake, I'm just telling you, this could be a long fight. He's going to come at you hard. I've been fighting my entire life, I replied. This is nothing. And just like that, the final twist came into play. I wasn't just the victim anymore. I wasn't just the son left broken and betrayed. I was a man who had learned the most painful lesson of all. That people like my father and Mara never really change. And it was time to make sure everyone knew exactly what they were. The fight was just beginning. The court case started small, almost innocuous, like a warning shot. My lawyer assured me that Henry's case was weak, that it was more of a tantrum than a serious legal battle. But I knew better. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about his pride. This was Henry trying to reclaim a sliver of his dignity in a world that had already cast him aside. For a few weeks, it felt like just another thing to deal with. We exchanged paperwork, went through the motions of legal jargon. My attorney was confident that the defamation case wouldn't go anywhere. The evidence was on my side. The video from the gala, the texts, the undeniable proof of their affair, it was all airtight. The problem, though, was Henry's desperation. And that's what made him dangerous. I didn't realize how far he was willing to go until the first real blow came. One morning, I found an anonymous envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single, crumpled piece of paper with only one sentence written in bold, jagged letters. "You will regret this." It didn't take long to figure out who it was from. There was no return address, no signature, just the kind of threat Henry would make when he had nothing else to lose. I wasn't afraid of him, not anymore. But I knew he wouldn't stop. He didn't know how to stop. His entire life had been built on manipulation and control, and now that he was stripped of everything, he was grasping at whatever he could to regain a sense of power. But I wasn't going to let him. I'd already fought my demons, and I'd already won. A few days later, a bombshell hit the news. It was a small, local story at first, something about a high-ranking executive at a well-known insurance firm being involved in fraudulent activities. But as I dug deeper, I realized it was my father. Henry had tried to cover his tracks, but the scandal was far bigger than anyone had expected. The firm he'd worked for had started an internal investigation, and they weren't going to keep it under wraps for long. I wasn't surprised by the news. In fact, I found a sick satisfaction in seeing him pay for everything he had done. But this was no longer just about him and me. This was about everyone who had ever enabled his lies, who had been complicit in pretending he was anything other than the petty, selfish man he'd always been. The legal battle continued, but the tide was turning. Henry's supporters were peeling away, and with every passing day, his case crumbled. Meanwhile, the story of the fraud was making its way through the local news cycle. It was almost poetic how the scandal played out exactly how I had imagined it would. Henry's reputation, what little of it was left, disintegrated in front of the people he had worked so hard to impress. I took a step back from the legal fight, and for the first time in months, I let myself feel the weight of relief. It was like a pressure valve had been released, and I was finally free to live life without the looming shadow of their betrayal hanging over me. I didn't have to look over my shoulder anymore. I didn't have to worry about my past coming back to haunt me. And then, in the middle of it all, something strange happened. I got another call from Mara. It was almost a week after I'd heard about the scandal. She sounded different. Not desperate, not pleading, just tired. Like someone who had been running from something for so long that they had no energy left to fight. I'm not asking for anything, she said softly, her voice wavering. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For everything. I ruined your life, Jake. I ruined everything. I let the silence linger for a moment before I spoke. You did. I know. She paused. I'm not trying to make you feel sorry for me. I just wanted to say I get it now. Everything you said about him, about us, you were right. It was a strange thing to hear. A part of me wanted to scream at her, wanted to remind her of everything she had taken from me, from my family. But another part of me, the part that had healed, that had moved on, knew that this apology meant nothing. It was too little, too late. You don't get to apologize now, I said flatly. You already took everything. There's nothing left. She didn't respond for a long time. I could hear her breathing on the other end, but she didn't speak again. Finally, I hung up. It was over. I had no more to give her. No more anger. No more forgiveness. Just nothing. I spent the next few days in a haze, not really thinking about what had happened. Instead, I focused on my work, on my business. I was surrounded by people who respected me, who supported me. People who didn't see me as just a stepping stone in their game of self-interest. I built something that was mine, that wasn't tainted by anyone's failures but my own. And then, like a final punctuation mark on the end of the chapter, I received a text from my mother. I'm moving on. She didn't need to explain. I knew exactly what she meant. Mom had filed for divorce months ago, and now she had found a new partner, a man who treated her with kindness and respect, someone who didn't try to control her, someone who appreciated her strength. It had taken her time to get here, but she was finally free of the shadow my father had cast over her life. I smiled when I read the text. It wasn't happiness. It was peace, a sense of completion. Life moved on. It always does. And the pieces of the past fell into place, fading like old scars. The last few months had been a whirlwind. Betrayal, loss, and redemption had all collided in ways I never could have predicted. But now, standing on the other side of it, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. We all have a choice: to let our past define us, or to take control and forge our own future. And I'd chosen mine.